In today's video, we're going to be talking about a rather popular, buzzwordy, and somewhat controversial topic: destiny. We will discuss whether fate and destiny are fixed, or whether it is possible to forge your own destiny as described in ancient texts. Before anything, we need to lay the foundation principles of this theory, which we can do our groundwork on. This, as you can imagine, is a rather complex matter, which relies on even more complex subjects in order to be properly understood. To emphasize this point better, I will utilize the term grok. Let's check the definition of grok. To grok is to intimately and completely share the same reality or line of thinking with another physical or conceptual entity. Author Robert A. Heinlein coined the term in his best-selling 1961 book, Strangers in a Strange Land. Therefore, grokking is the next level to knowing. It's more than knowledge. It's sharing your existence with the reality of the concept or being you are using as a subject. I know this must be very hard to grasp for a lot of people, and if it is the same to you, then try to think about any principle or thought you fundamentally hold dear. Then contrast it with a factoid you simply know about. A good example would be your career. You may, for example, be an accomplished artist. You intrinsically know within yourself that you are accomplished. You deeply understand your situation, and as such, it would be phenomenally hard to undermine your sense of worth in the area of your expertise. You are a master of your trade, and you're well aware of it. You grok your crafts, and thus you see yourself as a projection of the very tapestry of your art in this physical plane. And as such, you are, and you've become accomplished due to it. In contrast, you know that trees have leaves. You know they perform photosynthesis and help feed the tree. They eat CO2 and produce oxygen, but you don't truly get it. You just know it. You wouldn't be able to feel this information with your entire body, to be intimately connected to this other being, the leaf or the tree, because it is vastly complex and completely outside your sphere of experience. Therefore, you know about the leaf and its processes, but you don't grok them. The same concept applies to what I'm about to tell you. These are things you must grok, not merely know, and it took me far too long to figure that out. Knowing leads to skewed mental images of the subject and a whole lot of rationalization. That in itself is not a bad thing, however, there's only so much we can understand by stacking knowledge bricks on top of one another. The fundamental breath of existence within you, otherwise known as your soul, is far more clairvoyant. However, there are very strong barriers in place which prevent your brain from partaking in said experiences, namely your memories. Things you think you know, labels you put on matters, beliefs about yourself and the people around you, these are all memories and they're all associated with the brain and physical body. These function as layers of linen which gently cover up existence and thus prevent life from following its unaltered course. That is not to say that altering the course of life is bad, of course. That's why we're here, to experience as many of those alterations as possible. However, it does mean that those memories make it very hard for you to hear the subtle voices of your intuition, which is the proxy of your soul. I once read somewhere that your brain's thoughts are like a screaming monkey, loud and brutish, very useful but incessant. The monkey provides extremely useful prompts because it's extremely invasive and thus makes absolutely sure you see and hear it. This means you are always informed about the course of the ship you're sailing. Intuition, on the other hand, is a subtle whisper, like a summer breeze gently blowing trees in the park. You won't hear it unless you're as still as a lake and not particularly focused on anything. It's easy to confuse with your own thoughts at times because some thoughts are very persuasive, but when intuition rings loudly, you will absolutely know it did, and there will be no doubt in your mind about whether it was your soul talking to you or your brain. Okay. With that out of the way, let me briefly run you through the components of the destiny paradigm as seen through my lens. Please do keep this in mind. The following explanations are all based on my own personal views and interpretations and are meant to serve as a starting point for your own personal research. Least of all, these ideas should create a little flame of insight in your mind and make you consider looking them up further and doing your own seeking. For more on that, refer to the intro video on this playlist. Chapter 1: The Universe. What concerns us today all starts with the notion of the soul. But in order to understand the notion of the soul, we need to frame the totality of existence in order for subdivisions to make sense. That's where the definition of the universe comes in. In my theory, the universe represents the totality of existence, including all possible timelines. It could, in a sense, be equivalated to a universal God, which represents the sum of all that there is, has been, or will be in a single continuum, existing as what we call the present moment. We could also call it the creation, if you want a different term. Okay, that may be a little confusing, so let me really quickly explain this through a bit of an example. Right now, you're likely watching this video. At the same time as watching this video, you could also be picking your nose, or eating your breakfast cereals, or scrolling social media. There's an infinite number of possibilities for this exact moment. We can, if we wanted, extrapolate this ad infinitum. For example, you could, if history developed in a different manner, be eating your cereals on the lush planet of Mars at this precise point in time. All of those are variants of the exact same event, but somehow none but one manifested itself, the one which you're experiencing right now. So what of the others? Don't they exist? You'd be inclined to think they are simple suppositions, alternate possibilities which our powerful internal CPU, the brain, has produced through its various algorithms. And to some degree that would be true. After all, your brain experiences only one of those options and has no choice but to imagine the rest. But that does not mean they don't exist. As I said, the universe is the totality of all that is, including all possible timelines. Therefore, your sugar-infused breakfast on Mars likely did, or I should say, rather does, happen at this very moment. In some other form of existence, it happened yesterday too, and perhaps tomorrow also, or maybe on every single day since the Big Bang and until the heat death of the universe. Some version of you may be savoring cereal on Mars. What I call this concept is the still image, which is what I use to describe the nature of the universe. Imagine that the universe as a whole is a single still image spit out of your Polaroid camera. You can hold it in your hand, spin it around, look at its back, zoom in with the lens, and so on. It does not move, contrary to what you may have assumed. If you looked at the picture, nothing really moves on it. And what I mean by that is that all of the possibilities we discussed about, as well as all the other possibilities of every other thing in existence, do not appear to you in the same way you could look inside an aquarium, say, and see your fish. That is because the universe is, as I've said multiple times now, the totality of all the possible experiences of the entire creation, all presented at once in a single monolithic fashion. That means that all of those experiences are seamlessly merged together into a big blob, and they occupy the same tiny space of this totality that you can barely distinguish them as separate threads. One timeline could differ from the next via moving your hand 2 centimeters to your left more than the other one. That is why it would be impossible for us to distinguish the individual events at that level. Our comprehension simply does not allow such fractal understanding of things. We can, however, experience or grok the idea by deeply understanding the concept and listening to our intuition in regards to its deeper meaning. In my case, I get a very specific feeling that is impossible to put in words, but which I understand very deeply. It's a little bit like telling 2 different tastes apart, or maybe a subtle difference in understanding you develop via constant practice. The final question some of you may ask in regards to this is, what about the multiverse? Yeah, well, the multiverse is a different concept which I may talk about in another video, but to say the least, it assumes a different sort of universe than the one I've talked about until now. The multiverse assumes there's a universe as a finite construct which can be said to exist within a larger space or dimension, just like the planet exists within the solar system. That's not a bad hypothesis in any case, it's just too microgranular. The universe I've talked about until now is, as I said, the totality of things, which would include those multiple universes from the former definition as well as the space between, below, or above them. That's why I'm reluctant to refer to my theory as the universe, because it leads people to think something relatively small. As I said, maybe creation is a better word. God works for me also, but it leads people to all sorts of other discussions that none of us want. Suffice to say, the terms are not mutually exclusive. I simply use the same word for 2 different concepts, and you need to make the distinction between the two through your own comprehension and hopefully my speaking prowess. Parallel timelines. In the previous chapter, I've spoken a fair bit about there being multiple timelines and parallel yet concomitant events happening at all times. I hope that at this point the idea of the still picture universe is rather clear to you. Using that as a foundation, I will now slightly better define the idea of parallel timelines. Rather than explaining this systematically, I will instead tell you a little story which may better help you understand the concept, logically least of all. This concept has been with me for many years, but I've never really grokked it until one fateful evening when I had a really strong experience waiting in line at the local KFC restaurant. I noticed some people entering through the door, some of whom reminded me of certain events from the past at that exact same location. I reminisced the past for a moment, and then I suddenly had a strong short-circuit feeling, as if something zapped my brain. Rather than seeing those events from the past, I saw the present, but I was dressed in a similar style to that which I had in the past. The trick here is that for a few brief seconds, I literally experienced living two timelines at the exact same time. I had all the memories of the present, all the attitude, thoughts, feelings, but I also had a whole new set of memories, thoughts, opinions, labels, and so forth, both existing in my brain at the exact same time. As I stared towards the door in relative shock, I stepped out of it and what I thought was the real timeline, or at least what I would have called it, only to notice myself heading towards the people who just entered with a sentiment that was familiar yet somewhat eerie. It was in fact the second timeline which was interjecting into my experience. As I was about to open up a discussion with one of the girls who came in, the other timeline kicked in due to a very strong sense of faithfulness towards my girlfriend at that time, who was waiting for me at the table nearby on the original timeline, I should call it. At that moment, I completely lost sight of the second and returned to what I would call the normal continuum. I am aware that this is not standard, and some of you may even think I need counseling, but irrespective of the finer points of this entire experience, after that specific moment, I gained a far deeper understanding of what this concept of timelines means. Having gained that ability to feel a second timeline at the same time, it became far easier for me to listen to my intuition in regards to this subject, which is what helped me further uncover some of the mysteries behind it. The experience has not repeated since, but I never needed it to. I have gained plenty of precious insight from that mere couple of moments close to a decade ago, enough to build an unwavering faith in the process, if not understanding it or any of its means. You can imagine those timelines as being threads within a linen. They're all very closely knit together, so much so that unless you imagine them incredibly closely, you couldn't even tell they're different strands. Yet somehow the final product is way too large to be a single thread or a single experience. Why? Well, because the final product is in fact the entirety of all the possibilities coalesced and therefore is infinite. This final product is part of the infinite fabric of the universe as described earlier, and I've never quite been good enough at maths to reliably explain to you how smaller and bigger infinities work. So what exactly decides which one of those timelines you experience? Surely there must be a common denominator, else you wouldn't be aware of only one of so many, right? Well, the truth is you are aware of all of them, because fundamentally you are also part of the universe. Your brain just isn't able to process this, therefore it feels as if you experience only one, but in reality you experience many. However, what makes the final decision as to which of the variants you observe directly through your physical experience is an nameable entity, that is, your soul. This leads us into our next topic. However, in order to avoid exhausting you and in order to adhere to YouTube best practices, I will delegate this topic to a part 2 video, which will be posted soon. In this part 2 video, we'll start drawing closer to the home of the subject by discussing the human spirit and its constituents, free will and choice, which will ultimately lead to the answer to the question we posed at the beginning of this video. Until next time then, be well.